Good morning, everyone. Let me add my welcome to Stephanie's, especially if you're new here. I'm Janet B. I'm a recovered compulsive eater and bulimic. Really happy to be here after an exciting few days. My daughter got married Tuesday. It was a two-night affair up in the mountains with just 20 of us, close family and friends, and it was absolutely spectacular. It was forecast to rain, but it didn't. We were very blessed. I'm very grateful. My son-in-law is already calling me mom, so I am just really happy. And I'm so happy to be back here with y'all today. And to pick up on page 25 in the big book, there is a solution. We left off on the paragraph, the great fact, and I'm going to start with that paragraph because they are telling us this is the great fact of this program. The great fact is just this and nothing less. So remember, we should settle for nothing less than this, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. And you see how they have that little asterisk there, and they say fully explained Appendix 2. When we finish this chapter, we'll go to Appendix 2 and take a look at it. So we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences. What is a spiritual experience? It's something that revolutionizes, completely changes our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today, so remember, for me, the central fact of my life was myself, but the central fact of our lives becomes the absolute certainty. We are 100% sure that our Creator, our loving Creator, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. That God comes and sets up shop inside each of our hearts when we invite Him to. And they say, well, that's a miracle, right? That our Creator wants to set up shop in my heart. And what does He do once He's there? He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Well, what's the first thing when we came around that we couldn't do by ourselves? We couldn't stop eating compulsively. But so they're telling us that when our Creator enters our hearts, and He does that when we invite Him to, which we'll do and we'll learn about in step 3, and then He'll do something that's miraculous, starting with removing the food obsession. I told y'all my daughter just got married a couple days ago. I'm thinking back a number of years where she just hung up the phone on me and said, "You'll never see me again." Um, and our time together was miraculous. God restores relationships, doesn't just remove our food obsession, right? Remember in one of the forwards, I think it's the forward to the second edition, not sure. They say they count their success by the fact that they've stopped drinking and reunited families. This program helps us in our relationships. So then they tell us, okay, if you're as seriously alcoholic or compulsive eater as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution. For the people who can get better in Weight Watchers or something, they say, fine, that's fine. But if you're a serious alcoholic, a real deal compulsive eater, there's no middle of the road solution. There's only two doors. They say life has become impossible, and we've passed into the region from which there's no return through human aid. That means they're telling us the group cannot be our higher power because the group is human aid. If we passed into the region from which there's no return through human aid, so it's like we pass from the region of normal and maybe overeating sometimes into the region of real deal compulsive eaters. There's no return through human aid. So there's only two doors. One, blot out. Go on to the bitter end, blotting it out with food, my intolerable situation as best I can. But of course, it's no good, right? We could never blot out completely. And the other, door number 2, accept spiritual help. It's kind of interesting. It doesn't say do all this work, do this, do that. It says accept spiritual help. Why don't we normally want to accept spiritual help? Well, as they say later in the book, a price has, actually, no, they say it at the top of this page, a price has to be paid. Self-searching, leveling of our pride, confession of our shortcomings. That's what we have to do in order to accept spiritual health. To let God know, I mean business, God, I really want you and I really do want to change. It's like if I hire a contractor to build my house and he comes and he puts up the sheetrock and then I just tear it down. And then the next day he puts up sheetrock and the next night I tear it down. After a few days, he's going to say, Lady, you really don't want me to build a house for you. So the way we cooperate with God, self-searching, leveling of our pride, confession of shortcomings, which the process requires. So those are our two doors, right? Blot out or attempt to blot out or accept spiritual help. So page 26, the first case of transatlantic trying to get help here, right? From America to Europe and back. American businessman, able to hold a job, went to the best psychiatrist in the United States, nothing. So he went to Europe saying, I will find the best psychiatrist there. So he saw Dr. Young, who is, I mean, he studied in like psychology classes today. He was a real deal good psychiatrist. And so what did he do? He went through therapy and he just understood his mind. And isn't that what we want to do? We want to understand why we became compulsive eaters. We want to, and you know why? This is my theory, so that we can find someone to blame, usually our parents. So we spend all this money in therapy to find out how our parents messed us up. But by the way, when we get to step 4, we have to look at those resentments against our parents and forgive them and look at all the ways we caused harm and grief to our parents. So he understood the way his mind worked and he said relapse was unthinkable. He knew it, he understood it. And then he was drunk in a short time. Imagine how he must have felt. Imagine going to all the doctors in your home country, the best psychiatrists, crossing the ocean. So if you're in America, going to Europe. If you're in Europe, coming to America and seeing the best doctor there and spending months and all your money and understanding how your parents messed you up and understanding what your triggers were. And then a week later, going out and going on a binge. Imagine how that would feel. And this is how that guy felt. And to a lesser extent, isn't that how we all felt? We tried this, we tried that, we tried the Weight Watchers, or we tried going to Overeaters Anonymous meetings without working the steps. We tried so many things. And we were binging again. And we were baffled. Like, why is this happening? So he returned to the doctor. So I guess here he is back in America, goes back to Europe and says, why can't I recover? He says, I want above everything to regain self-control. That's my number one desire. But remember, we cross a point, page 24, where the most powerful desire to stop binging is of absolutely no avail. So he could wish it above everything, right? I wished it above everything. A lot of us did. And it said, no. And so he says, doctor, tell me, give me the news. And the doctor says, okay, here it is. You are utterly hopeless. The only thing that will help you, hire a bodyguard to follow you 24/7 to make sure you don't take any drinks, or have someone lock you up. Imagine being told that that's your solution, a bodyguard to make sure you don't reach for candy or to be locked in a room where someone brings you your food. And the doctor, Dr. Young, like a great doctor, said, that's your only option. And then bottom of page 26, but this man still lives and is a free man, no bodyguard, not locked up. He can go anywhere on earth without disaster, without getting drunk, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. And what's that attitude? Again, we'll see it through the next few weeks, but in a nutshell, it's we surrender to God, try to do what we think God wants, clear away the damage of our past, and help others. An attitude of surrender to God and service to others. And with that attitude, he said he could go anywhere, back to America, back to Europe. Maybe he went on a safari to Africa. Maybe he went up to the North Pole. He could go anywhere with that attitude. And then they say, okay, some of y'all may think you can do it without spiritual help, right? Like you have this information, and they say, let's tell you the rest of the stuff that he talked about with Dr. Young. And Dr. Young said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have seen 0 people recover where that state of mind existed to the extent it does in you. 0% chance of recovery. And how did the guy feel? Like the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. Hopeless because of his alcoholic mind. So, what's the alcoholic mind? Again, we talked about it last week. Stephanie's put the link to last week's meeting in the chat. The mind of a chronic alcoholic or chronic compulsive eater says some variation of, this time will be different. This time I will be able to have 1 or 2 and be able to stop. Or this time I can binge, but I'll put my head on a magic pillow for 8 hours and I'll wake up, and tomorrow I'll have the willpower I was never able to have. Or I'm going to binge because I don't care. And we wake up the next day and of course we care. So it's like this time will be different. That's the mind that we have. And so he says to the doctor, are there any exceptions? I mean, you're telling me 0% chance of recovery. Are there any exceptions? And the doctor says, yes. Since the beginning of time, every now and then, because remember, before this book, there may have been a miracle, I don't know, every 20 years, every 300 years. But our book tells us that with these 12 steps and the publication of this book, there is now a wholesale miracle. It's happening in droves, in tens of thousands of people. But back then, it was so rare. So they say once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences, right? So what we started with, the rearrangement in our souls. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. I looked up the definition of phenomena. It means something that's extraordinary. And I was trying to think of an example, and this is the best I could think of. So imagine like a team of ants trying to carry a crust of bread up to their anthill. And they've got like 100 little ants struggling to get this little tiny piece of crust of bread to their anthill. And then a little boy walks by and he sees it, and he's a nice little boy, not the kind that steps on them. And he just takes a crust of bread in his fingers and he moves it to the anthill for them. That's not usual for ants. Nice little boys don't reach in and help them. But every now and then one might. And they're saying every now and then God breaks into human history and does miracles. But for some reason, back, I think it was like in the 1930s, when this book was published, God decided he was going to do wholesale miracles for addicts. It's like a little boy walking around the country looking for all the anthills so he can find ants to help. Not the best example, best I could do this morning. So they say, okay, what are these phenomena? What is this spiritual experience? It appears to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, right? The way I had read this described once is we stop arranging ourselves around our sick selves and start arranging ourselves around an unsick God. So we start rearranging ourselves, or God starts rearranging us around Him, around service to others. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. We become different people. I've told you all how I'm like not a very good housekeeper, but I'm a different person than I used to be. So when we went away to my daughter's wedding, when we were leaving yesterday, I stripped the bed. So it would be one less thing for the housekeeper to do. I mean, I barely make my bed in my own house, but God has made me less selfish than I used to be. And that's what He does for all of us. He changes us. And the doctor says, I've been trying to produce these emotional rearrangements within you, but hasn't worked. Well, of course, because a doctor isn't God. A doctor can give us information. A sponsor or a group can give us information that points us to God, but no one else is God. I can't make my sponsees have this emotional rearrangements, but I can tell them how to put themselves in the position that God will do it for them. And that's a sponsor's job. Take her sponsee's hand, put it in the hand of God. So this guy who traveled to Europe, to America, back and forth, he says, well, this is good. I go to church. And the doctor says, okay, that's all well and good, but that does not equal a spiritual experience. Good church member, I can go to church every Sunday. That doesn't mean I'm rigorously honest. That doesn't mean I think about other people. That doesn't mean I've made amends for the ridiculously bad things I've done in my past. And that doesn't even mean I'm doing God's will. It just means I'm showing up on Sunday for an hour and a half. So, page 28, they say, here was a terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had that extraordinary experience which made him a free man. Okay, can you imagine that? Like he'd gone America to Europe, back and forth. He's told he would need a bodyguard or would have to lock himself up. And he is now free and can go anywhere. That is what our God does for us. That's what's available to all of us. And then they say, we, meaning the 100 people who put this book together, we sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. Drowning men are really desperate. They don't say, you know, that life preserver is yellow, I want a blue one. They say what seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. I can imagine if something is drowning and all they see is this like one little reed sticking up out of the water, they're going to grab it. And then imagine their surprise when it's not just like a little blade of grass, a flimsy reed, but it's like the part of a strong oak tree that they can hang on to. And look at this. They're giving us our first clues about God. And I love to go through this book and look for clues about God because I had some very false ideas about him. So, what do they say here? God is loving and God is powerful and God is reaching out his hand to us. Okay, that's a God I might be interested in, not the God of the baseball bat who is always ready to get me. A loving and powerful God who's reaching out his hand. It says, a new life has been given us. Well, that's for sure. Or if you prefer, a design for living, a way of life that really works. And then they cite a book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. I actually haven't picked it up in about 20 years. I tried to read it when I first came around. I read a few chapters. I thought it was really good. It's a little dense. I never made my way through the whole thing. But they're saying the point of that book, Varieties of Religious Experience, is that there's lots of ways that men have discovered God. They say we have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. It must be acquired, but there's different ways. They take no position on religion or lack of religion. And they tell us if what we have learned and felt and seen, look, so they've not just learned, they've felt it, they've experienced it, they've seen it, they've seen changes. If that means anything at all, it means all of us, whatever our race, creed, that means religious belief or lack of religious belief, or color, are the children of a living creator. Okay, another way they describe God, he's living, he's alive. He didn't just like create the world, a few thousand years ago and then like sit back and watch Netflix for the rest of all time. He's living and he's our creator. And I believe he's also our recreator, right? He's recreating us. We're all the children of this living creator with whom we may form a relationship, not just a belief, right? I believe that there's now it's a king, right? A king in England, but I have no relationship with him and I don't need to. And I suspect even most of you in the UK believe in him, know he's there, but don't really have a relationship with him. But we can have a relationship with the living creator of the universe upon simple and understandable terms. So we don't all need to go get like degrees in theology, a relationship with him based on simple terms so that means as soon as we're willing and honest enough to try. Well, how do I try? How do I try to grab a flimsy reed? How can I be like, what does that look like in practical terms? Willing to believe in God, willing to have a relationship. So I think it goes something like this. We can say a prayer, even if we don't believe. We can say, God, I don't know if you exist. And if you exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, I need some help, right? So that shows we're willing and we're honest. We're not saying, Dear God, I know you're there. When we don't, then God's going to say you're a liar. We say, God, I don't know you're there, but I want you to be there, right? And then as we're waiting, we start doing the things that God, if he existed, we know he would want us to do. We know he would want us to think of his other kids and be kind to them. We can start with that, with putting our welfare behind the welfare of others. We can assume that God would want us to be honest, so we can start being honest. We can assume that God would want us to spend time with him, so we might like find some book about God or a devotional. I looked up the books that the founders of AA read, and that's what I read, so that we can start connecting with God. If we want a relationship with someone, we have to talk to them and we have to listen. So that's prayer and meditation. And we can start doing these things today from day one. And they say those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. So we never get in here and say, you should be Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, you should have no religion. There is no place for that here. They are very clear. People can have a relationship with God no matter what their creed, no matter what their belief. And they say, we think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. So it's everyone's own business what church, synagogue, mosque, or nothing they want to go to. They say it's an entirely personal affair. We don't all join religious bodies. Most of us favor such memberships, but certainly not a requirement. And then they tell us what we're going to get in the chapters ahead, kind of a sneak preview summary. In the following chapter, so that's chapter 3, which we'll do next week, God willing, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it. And that we'll see there'll be 5 men in there, different types of men who tried to stop drinking and couldn't. And so we'll kind of go through those and see what their issues were. And then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. They say many who were once in this class, who were once agnostics, are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. We can start agnostic, but if we work these steps, we won't stay agnostic. That's what they're telling us, that we can still have a spiritual experience, an experience of God. And then they say further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. These are followed by 42 personal experiences. This is page 29. And then they tell us the point of these stories. They say each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language, right, the way he speaks, so we don't have to polish ourselves up, and from his own point of view, the way he established his relationship with God. The point of our stories is to show how we got a relationship with God. So experience, strength, and hope pointing to our relationship with God. Sometimes, if I have a new sponsee who's going to share her story for the first time and she says, I'm nervous, say, just make God the hero of your story. It's never about us. It's always about God. So we don't have to be nervous, right? If I'm giving a report on someone else, and I'm giving a report on what God has done in my life, how he has restored my relationships, how he has removed my food obsession, how he has restored me to sanity. I only start with like my, they call it drunkalog, right? My binge history, just so people know that I have my seed here, that I deserve my seed here. But how we established our relationship with God. And they say these give a fair cross section of our membership and a clear idea of what has actually happened in our lives, what has happened to us. They say, we hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women, compulsive eaters, desperately in need, that's the audience, right? Someone who is desperately in need, will see these pages, and we believe by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems, they'll be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. So our goal of sharing is so that others will want to work this program and will want this thing. Well, what is this thing? This thing is like a relationship with God. So on page 25, they talked about, they referenced the appendix, a spiritual experience. So we have some time. So I just want to, excuse me, take a few minutes and go through that appendix. It's on page 567. So page 567, it says the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book. And it says what it is. It says a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself in many different forms. So that means we're going to have a personality change, and that results in our freedom from compulsive eating, right? We're unselfish, we're God-centered. So there are times when I've heard people say, I've had a spiritual experience or I've had a spiritual awakening, and I'm still in the food, but I have more serenity and I don't have as many resentments as I used to. And I say to that, no, no. A spiritual experience always results in recovery from alcoholism or compulsive eating. So if a person is still eating compulsively, she's either never had a spiritual experience or had it in the past, but stopped living in steps 10, 11, and 12, right? Remember in the chapter into action, it says that we are placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected, as long as we maintain our spiritual condition. So if we're in the food, we are not living our spiritual experience. And if I had a spiritual experience yesterday, but I'm, God forbid, in the food today, I shouldn't go bragging that I at one time had a spiritual experience. I need to fix what's wrong today. And of course we can. God always takes us home. So it says, okay, in our first edition, a lot of people had the impression that they need to have this kind of experience like Bill Wilson did, this like white light type of experience. And they say, That isn't true. And I know for myself, when I went and I said a prayer similar to the one I just told y'all, I said, God, I've always had fixed ideas of what you were like and what you wanted of me. I'm willing to admit it's all wrong and start over and let you show me what you're like and how to worship you. And then I took like the toughest sponsor in the room and said, I will do whatever you tell me. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my last binge before that meeting. That was my last binge. Um, but I didn't realize it. It wasn't like Bill. It's like the obsession's removed. I'm never going to binge again. It's just like I went about my business. I kept my head down. I did what my sponsor told me. I gave myself an assignment to spend 45 minutes every morning with God. My sponsor didn't give me that assignment. I gave it to myself. So I developed a relationship with God, and didn't realize that he was starting that spiritual experience process in me that very night as an answer to that prayer and my willingness. And it says, like, okay, in the first few chapters, we talk about the sudden revolution. And they say, we didn't intend to create the impression that if that doesn't happen to you, it doesn't count. It says, but some people seem to take it that way. So that's why we're writing this appendix. And they say thousands of alcoholics have had a transformation. That's frequent. And they say, but that's not the rule. William James, remember the guy who wrote that book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, says a lot of people have educational varieties because they develop slowly over a period of time. And says often other people are aware of the difference in that person long before he is himself. I didn't know what was happening to me. Again, I just kept like my head down, and then it's like, oh, I have a week, I have a month, I have 3 months, I have a year, and then the years, it's just like it just happened. And they say, he meaning the alcoholic, the compulsive eater, finally realizes he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life. It's like one day we look up and say, who is that person who took the sheets off the bed for the housekeeper? Who is that person who's like, will take a phone call when American Idol is on TV? Like, who is that? That's not me. Me is selfish and self-centered. They say this change could hardly have brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months. So let's see, today is mid-September. So I'm going to say, like, by Christmas, a few months, we can all be like transformed. That's the promise of this book. They say couldn't take place by ourselves alone. And what takes place in a few months couldn't even take place with years of self-discipline. They say, with few exceptions, our members find they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves, with God. So this inner resource, it's not self-help. It's not let me muster up all my willpower because my willpower doesn't work with food. They say they identify it with a power greater than themselves. And when they capitalize the P in power, they're talking about God. They say most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. So it's like being aware that God is active in my life. That's the essence of a spiritual experience. That God is changing me, that God is like removing my food obsession, that God is like making me care about other people, like not sponsor them only as an insurance policy, but sponsor them because it's fun, because, I like doing it because it feels good to help other people. And then they say, most emphatically, we want to assure you. So assure anyone who's struggling now that any alcoholic, any compulsive eater capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover. Why did they use that clause in the light of our experience? I think, when I talk about some of the like horrible, rotten things I've done, like pretend I was raped to get attention or things like that, it makes it easier for other people to face their problems because they're not going to a group of perfect people. They're going to a people who are flawed, but who are now on the other side of the obsession, who aren't obsessing about food anymore. And they say anyone can recover provided he doesn't close his mind to all spiritual concepts. So an agnostic is someone who says, I don't know there's a God. An atheist, A means like against theism, against God. Someone who says, I know there's no God and I do not want to change my point of view. Yeah, they're saying, don't think we can help you. They say a person can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance, intolerance of like spiritual concepts that are not my own, or belligerent denial, saying, I'm different than other people. You all may need to do this, but I don't, because I'm either better than you, or I'm worse than you, or I'm younger, or I'm older, or I'm a different race, religion, something different about me. Instead of just saying, I'm a run of the mill compulsive eater, just like everyone else on this line. And then they say, we find that no one needs have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. They say, okay, it's not difficult. There's three things that are essential: willingness, willing to believe that maybe there's a God, maybe. One assignment I got from a sponsor once that was incredible was to take the weekend and look for miracles, right? If I want to buy a red truck, I will notice every red truck on the road. If I'm not interested in red trucks, 100 may go past me and I don't care. Looking for miracles, right? So willingness, willing to believe there's a God, willing to believe that God really can restore me personally to sanity, willing to do the work, right? Willing to clear away the wreckage of my past, to be unselfish, to help others. Honesty. I mean, the beginning of chapter 5 says people who aren't honest won't recover, right? We usually don't want to be honest because we don't want to pay a price, because we want to get something we think we won't get if we're honest. We have to be honest and trust that God will give us what we need. And open-mindedness to think, maybe the things I thought about you, God, were all wrong. Maybe you're different. And if we've had troubles in this program, maybe the things I've thought about this program are wrong and I need a new kind of experience. And if that's you, I would say grab yourself a big book sponsor who has worked this program, has a relationship with God, and who can put your hand in the hand of God. They say these are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable, meaning if I'm not going to be honest, I shouldn't even bother trying to work this. And then they close by saying, there is a principle that's a bar against all information, a proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. So when I was doing like my weekend of looking for miracles that my sponsor told me, I saw like some little stuff. I'd say, okay, like, the baby smiled or this, and I was really looking. And then there was this youth group retreat where my daughter wasn't sure she wanted to go. And we were at church, and someone she knew who lived 3 hours away just happened to be at that church that day and said, like, oh, I was thinking of going to this retreat. And my daughter was like, well, if you go, I'll go. And they went together. And it's like, how did that happen? Like some girl from 3 hours away just happened to be there that day. And then, I remember also I met a woman at an OA meeting. So this was, there were meetings in person, and she was in AA and OA. And I was praying like, God, I don't have the experience of helping anyone who was also in AA. Should I sponsor her or not? And then I just heard on the radio, you be the miracle. And it's like, okay, there's my answer. I will. So I find that when I look for miracles, I get them, which thank God, because the essence of this program really is miracles, that God comes into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous.